zero tail surfaces, zero fuselage, 172 feet of wing, and nothing else. The YB-49 flew in 1947, 40 years before the B-2 Spirit proved the all-wing concept could win a war. The Air Force buried it anyway. Jack Northrop drew his first flying wing in 1929. Not a sketch on a napkin, a full aircraft. He spent the next 18 years refining the idea, while every aerodynamicist in the country told him he'd lost his mind. A flying wing has no vertical stabilizer, no horizontal tail, no conventional fuselage to hang engines on. Every textbook said it couldn't maintain stable flight. Every wind tunnel said it shouldn't work. Northrop built it anyway. First the N-1M in 1940, then the N-9M, then the massive XB-35 with 4 piston engines driving contra-rotating propellers. The XB-35 carried the same bomb load as a B-36 at 2/3 the empty weight. The range numbers looked impossible. They held up. The shape itself defied everything the Army Air Forces understood about bombers. No drag from a fuselage meant fuel efficiency the competition couldn't touch. No tail meant fewer surfaces for radar to bounce off, a fact nobody cared about in 1947, and everybody cared about in 1981. Northrop's engineers calculated the radar cross-section advantages decades before stealth became a word Pentagon briefings used. The company's internal documents reference reduced detectability in language that reads like it belongs in a 1980s black program. It belonged to 1946. Test pilot Max Stanley took the YB-49 up from Muroc Army Airfield on its maiden flight, October 21, 1947. 8 jet engines buried in the wing, no propeller problems. Stanley called the handling remarkably smooth for something that ugly. The airplane climbed to 40,000 feet and cruised above 400 miles per hour. It carried enough fuel to strike targets 3,000 miles out and return. If this story matters to you, the machines that got buried, the engineers who got it right too early, hit subscribe. Leave a comment with the aircraft you think deserved better. Like the video, so the algorithm shows it to someone who still remembers when Muroc had dirt runways. So why did it die? That question consumed Jack Northrop for 30 years. The official answer involved yaw instability, 2 fatal crashes, and a Secretary of the Air Force named Stuart Symington, who wanted Northrop's company to merge with Consolidated Vultee. Northrop refused. 30 days later, the flying wing contract disappeared. Every completed airframe, every one, ordered destroyed. Not mothballed, not sent to a boneyard, but cut apart with torches and fed to smelters. The records around the cancellation stay incomplete. Northrop testified before Congress in 1949 that Symington demanded the merger as a condition of the contract. Symington denied it. The file contains both statements and no resolution. What survives is the shape. That impossible fuselage-less, tailless shape that Northrop drew in 1929, flew in 1947, and watched die in 1949. 32 years later, engineers at a facility in Burbank started drawing something that looked almost identical. Different company, different materials. The shape hadn't changed. Hawthorne, California, 1940. A concrete hangar on the edge of a municipal airport, close enough to the Pacific that salt air corroded unpainted aluminum overnight. Inside, Jack Northrop's team assembled the N-1M from wood and tubular steel, a twin-engine pusher with a 38-foot span that looked like someone had ripped the body off a normal airplane and thrown it away. The thing weighed 4,000 pounds. It sounded like a lawnmower at full throttle. Moy Stevens flew it first, skimming across the dry lake at Rosamond in July. The N-1M topped out at 200 miles per hour on a good day with a tailwind. It wallowed in yaw. The Eleven controls felt mushy below 140 knots, and crosswinds turned landing into an argument with physics. None of that mattered to Northrop. He sat in the hangar with a slide rule and a set of drag calculations that showed the pure wing. No fuselage parasite drag, no tail interference drag. Delivered 15 to 20% better lift-to-drag ratio than any conventional bomber of equivalent weight. 15% meant 15% more range on the same fuel. In a strategic bombing campaign spanning oceans, that margin bought you targets the other designs couldn't reach. Northrop repeated those numbers to anyone who would listen for the next 9 years. Most stopped listening after the first 2. He kept the slide rule warm. By 1941, the Army Air Corps had issued a contract for a full-scale bomber version, what became the XB-35. Northrop scaled his wing from 38 feet to 172. 4 Pratt and Whitney R. 4 360 Wasp major engines, each producing 3,000 horsepower, driving 8-blade contra-rotating propellers through a gearbox so complex that mechanics at Muroc spent more time fixing propeller assemblies than doing anything else. The engines ran hot. The gearboxes failed constantly. Flight test reports from 1946 document 11 forced landings in 13 flights, a rate that would ground any program today and nearly grounded this one then. Northrop's chief test engineer, a quiet Minnesotan named Theodore Coleman, argued the airframe had nothing to do with the propulsion failures. The wing flew the way Northrop always said it would. The propellers kept breaking. Coleman would die in June 1948 aboard the second YB-49 prototype when it entered an unrecoverable spin over Muroc at 5,000 feet. Captain Glenn Edwards died with him. The Air Force renamed the base Edwards Air Force Base 4 months later. Back to Northrop's problem. The propeller gearboxes gave Convair's B-36 lobby exactly the ammunition it needed. The B-36 used 6 pushing propellers with conventional shafts, simpler, proven, and utterly boring. It also had a fuselage the size of a railroad tunnel and the aerodynamic elegance of a filing cabinet. It carried a bigger bomb load. It flew farther. Convair's salesmen worked Congress, while Northrop's engineers worked wind tunnels. The jet conversion solved the propulsion headache overnight. Swapping the 4-piston engines for 8 Allison J-35 turbojets eliminated the gearbox failures entirely. The YB-49's first flight proved the airframe had never been the problem. General Hoyt Vandenberg flew as an observer on a demonstration flight in April 1948 and told the press the aircraft itch-weighed anything else in the inventory for its size. His enthusiasm lasted exactly as long as the political winds supported it. Stuart Symington wanted consolidation in the aircraft industry. Northrop employed 7,000 people in Hawthorne, small enough to absorb, big enough to matter. Consolidated Vultee wanted Northrop's engineers. Symington wanted Consolidated Vultee happy. The math worked for everyone except Jack Northrop. When Northrop refused the merger, the Flying Wing Evaluation Board suddenly discovered stability deficiencies that previous test reports hadn't emphasized. The yaw problem existed. It always had. But it ranked as manageable in every pilot assessment before the merger conversation collapsed. After the collapse, manageable became unacceptable. 11 completed and partially completed airframes went to the smelter. Northrop himself described the sound: shearing metal, hydraulic cutters chewing through wing spars. His team had stress tested to 150% of design load. He stood on the tarmac at Hawthorne and watched trucks haul away the aluminum scrap. He resigned from his own company in 1952. He spent the next 20 years telling anyone who'd listen that the cancellation had nothing to do with aerodynamics. The aerodynamics agreed with him. 10:14 a.m., June 5, 1948. The second YB-49 prototype lifted off Muroc's main runway with Captain Glenn Edwards in the left seat, Lieutenant Daniel Forbes on the right, and 3 other crew members behind them. The flight plan called for a series of stall tests at altitude, routine envelope expansion, the kind of work test pilots do every week at every flight test facility in the country. They reached around 40,000 feet. What happened next took less than a minute. Witnesses on the ground saw the aircraft pitch up, yaw hard left, then enter a flat spin. A flying wing in a flat spin has almost no recovery mechanism. It lacked a tail to bite into the airflow, a fuselage to act as a weather vane, anything that might break the rotation. Just 172 feet of wing corkscrewing toward the desert floor like a maple seed the size of a building. Forbes reportedly transmitted once, a partial call, clipped mid-word. The tower recording captured engine noise and silence. The wreckage scattered across 600 yards of hardpan north of the base. All 5 crew killed on impact. Forbes had a wife and infant son in base housing 3 miles south. She heard the crash. Edwards left behind a young wife in Lancaster. He'd turned 30 the previous October. Same month the first YB-49 made its maiden flight with Max Stanley at the controls. Stanley later said Edwards flew with more patience than any test pilot I knew, which is probably why they gave him the stall series. Patience didn't help against physics that morning. The Accident Investigation Board concluded the aircraft experienced a pitch-up at high angle of attack that exceeded the relevant authority available for recovery. The yaw damper, a rudimentary system by any standard, couldn't arrest the departure. Northrop's engineers argued a modern flight control system would have prevented the sequence entirely. They weren't wrong. They also didn't have one. The Air Force now held 2 facts that pointed in opposite directions. The YB-49's performance numbers remained extraordinary. Its departure characteristics remained fatal. Stuart Symington's office needed only one of those facts. 4 months after the crash, the Air Force renamed Muroc. Edwards Air Force Base, named for the captain who died proving the flying wing could kill its crew faster than any enemy could. The tribute felt like an elegy for the aircraft itself. Northrop read the announcement from Hawthorne. The base got a new name. His airplane got a smelter. A balsa wood model, 18 inches long, unpainted. Northrop Corporation engineers carried it into a hospital room in Glendale, California, in the spring of 1980. Jack Northrop sat in a wheelchair. He'd suffered a series of strokes that left him unable to speak more than a few words at a time. He turned 85 that April. The model had no tail, no fuselage, just wing. The men who brought it held top-secret clearances. What they showed Northrop didn't have a public name yet. The Advanced Technology Bomber Program, what became the B-2 Spirit, existed behind classification walls so thick that fewer than 200 people in the entire country knew its shape. The Northrop Corporation, the company Jack Northrop founded and left in bitterness 30 years earlier, had won the contract. The design team at Pico Rivera worked in a windowless facility, surrounded by armed guards, and swept for listening devices twice daily. They drew a flying wing, not a flying wing inspired by Northrop's work, a flying wing that traced its lineage directly to the YB-49's planform geometry. The sweep angle differed. The materials bore no resemblance. Radar-absorbent composites over titanium substructure instead of aluminum skin over aluminum spars. The flight control system used quadruple redundant fly-by-wire computers that sampled control inputs 40 times per second, correcting yaw instability faster than any human pilot could perceive it. The problem that killed Glenn Edwards and Daniel Forbes, solved by software running on processors that wouldn't exist for another 30 years after their deaths. Northrop looked at the model. He ran his fingers along the leading edge. The engineers explained carefully in broad terms permitted by their security handlers that the shape made the aircraft nearly invisible to radar, the same property his own engineers had noted in internal documents in 1946, reduced detectability, their words, 4 decades earlier. Northrop's response, filtered through his limited speech, amounted to a single question. He asked the engineers to confirm that the design resembled his flying wing. They confirmed it. He reportedly wept. Then he said, or wrote, sources conflict on whether he spoke or used a notepad. Now I know why God has kept me alive for 25 years. He died 10 months later, February 18th, 1981. He never saw the B-2 fly. He never saw the rollout ceremony at Air Force Plant 42 in Palmdale on November 22, 1988, where the aircraft emerged from its hangar at dusk so Soviet reconnaissance satellites couldn't photograph it clearly. 2,000 invited guests stood on a roped-off tarmac and watched a shape roll forward that looked like it had crawled out of 1947. The gasps from the older engineers in the crowd carried a specific frequency, recognition mixed with something harder to name. The B-2's unit cost landed at $737 million each in 1997 procurement terms. 21 built. Congress screamed about the price the same way Congress screams about every aircraft that changes the equation. The aircraft entered service with the 509th Bomb Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, the same unit designation that dropped atomic weapons on Japan. It flew its first combat missions over Serbia in 1999, launching from Missouri, striking targets in Belgrade, turning around, landing back in Missouri. 30-hour missions, unrefueled combat radius of 6,000 nautical miles. The range numbers Northrop promised in 1946, delivered in 1999 with a radar cross-section smaller than a marble. The yaw instability that grounded the YB-49 persists in the B-2's basic aerodynamics. The computers simply fix it 60 times faster than it develops. Every flight, the B-2 tries to kill its crew, the same way the YB-49 killed Glenn Edwards. Every flight, the computers say no. The airframe never changed its mind about spinning. The Air Force just learned to argue faster. Northrop's Hawthorne facility closed in 1996. The hangar where the N-1M took shape sits on land occupied by a shopping center. The last surviving N-9M rests in the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center behind glass, 50 feet from a docent who explains it to school groups twice a day. Max Stanley, the test pilot who made the first YB-49 flight and called it ugly, the man who watched the program die and his colleagues buried in the desert, attended the B-2 rollout in Palmdale. A reporter asked what he thought. Stanley, 80 years old, looked at the aircraft for a long time. Jack would have wanted to fly it. He would have climbed in right now, bad legs and all, and taken it around the pattern. And it would have handled just fine.